I tasted iron before I tasted fear. It was the coppery smear of blood on my tongue, warm as breath, that told me I was still alive, alive enough to feel the wind claw at my coat and hear the river snarl somewhere below. Gravel bit into my cheek. Pine needles pricked the soft inside of my palm, and just beyond my boots, the earth dropped away into a black mouth of air. "Don't move," Thomas whispered, his voice a thread fraying. "Ellie, don't move." The way he said my name, Ellie, like a prayer he'd kept for emergencies only, snapped me into a terrible clarity. Somewhere above us, footsteps skittered over rock, quick, urgent, controlled. That sound used to comfort me. It used to mean our boy was home. I tried to blink the world into focus. The sky was a hard enamel blue, unbroken. Cold gnawed through my sleeves and found the bones of my forearms. When I breathed, something sharp in my ribs reminded me to keep the breath small, secretive. Do not give yourself away. A camera shutter clicked once, twice, sweet as a lullaby if you didn't know better. "Hold on," a woman's voice cooed. Honey poured over glass. "I'll call for help, baby. It's going to be okay." I knew that voice as well as I knew the creak in our porch steps. Melissa had practiced the softness in a mirror, I think, until it fit her face like a glove. The last thing I remembered before the fall was not the push, it was the smile. Our son, my youngest, the one I carried low and stubborn, who came into the world like a fist and grew into a man with hands gentle enough to plain walnut smooth, had smiled. "Mom, step back just a little," he'd said, nodding at the view. "You'll want the valley behind you." Damien knew how I loved photographs. Birthdays with crooked candles, the first chair Thomas ever carved, Richard holding a fish he swore was bigger before the camera saw it. I stepped back, obedient as faith, and the ground wasn't where I thought it would be. Now the ground was everywhere, pressed against my cheek, filling my mouth, burning my palms. Pebbles slipped, ticking down the slope. I didn't dare lift my head, but I could see in slivers. Thomas's boot toes crusted with dust, his knuckles white on a root they shouldn't trust, a ribbon of smoke, blue water far below. The wind carried the faint sweetness of crushed sage and the colder smell of granite. If I let my mind wander, it would go to the kitchen at home. Coffee and toast, steam on the window, the dent in the old oak table where Richard's science project once caught fire. Home was a small house with a workshop out back, curls of wood on the floor like spilled cinnamon. If I thought about home, I would cry. If I cried, I would breathe too much. If I breathed too much, I would die. "Are they?" Melissa's voice drifted, feather-light, barely snagging on the rocks. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I heard a pause. Then Damien's answer, low and steady. "The way you speak when you've decided on a story. They're not moving." Another click of the camera. Another small rehearsal for the part of the grieving son. Somewhere above, a boot scuffed as if testing how close one could stand to the edge without falling in. Thomas's fingers brushed my wrist just once, a code we'd invented in another life for crowded rooms and church pews. "I'm here." I wanted to tell him I could feel heat leaking from somewhere near my shoulder, a dampness that cooled as the air licked at it. I wanted to tell him my left foot felt twisted into a shape God never intended. I wanted to tell him I believed him now, about the papers, about the whispers he said he heard through the workshop door, about the night 25 years ago when he held a secret like a coal until it blistered his palms. But he squeezed my wrist again, and the message was different this time. Not yet. Live first. Speak later. A fly landed on my lip and I nearly screamed from the insult of it. I imagined the nurse's fluorescent light later, the antiseptic sting, a detective with a notebook and a face that didn't commit to pity. I imagined nothing. I tried to make my body a lake at dawn, flat, misted, unreadable. Somewhere a hawk split the air in two. Melissa's phone caught another sound I could not see, a tiny, obedient beep. "Poor us," she sighed, the sorrow shaped just right. "We did everything we could." I thought of the first time Melissa called me Mom and how it tripped on my ears before it settled. I thought of the day she opened my pantry and said, "Let me reorganize this for you," and how I let her, grateful for help. I thought of the legal folder she brought over in a lemon yellow tote the afternoon Damien said, "It's smart, Mom, we're just tidying things up." Melissa had touched my hand then, warm, dry. "You'd be protecting yourselves," she said. And I watched the word protecting float in the kitchen air, its belly full of teeth. Above us, Damien cleared his throat. "We need to go get help," he said, and his voice almost broke in the right place. "Stay here," he told Melissa. "I'll get a signal by the bend." He was careful with the details. He always had been when he wanted something. I heard the crunch of his steps moving away, and the softer shuffle of Melissa repositioning herself for the performance. A woman on the edge of tragedy, the wind kneading her hair into sympathy. She sniffled. She practiced. Thomas exhaled, the smallest sigh. "Ellie," he whispered, almost soundless. "When I tug, we slide back 2 inches. Just 2. My skin turned to needles. The slope was a cruel lesson. Everything that moved wanted to move more. The cliff didn't have to push. It only had to wait. I counted my breaths, folded them into the thin space between heartbeats. 2 inches was a lifetime. 2 inches was the difference between a headline and a courtroom. We moved. The world shifted under us like a beast waking. Gravel hissed. A stone skipped into silence. My teeth found each other and held. When we stopped, I could see a new thing. A notch in the rock like a handle, the dry scratch of lichen. Thomas's voice came back to me from long ago, teaching our boys how to sand with the grain. Let the wood tell you what it wants to be. Let the mountain tell you where to hold. Let fear be a tool, not a master. Somewhere behind us, Melissa made a phone call that pretended to fail and promised to try again. "Damien," she called, small and brave. "Be quick." The wind carried her words away as if it were tired of them. I pressed my tongue to the cut inside my cheek and tasted iron again. I thought of the will we signed on a Tuesday and the empty corner of the bank statement Thomas slid under my teacup one night, his eyes asking me to look harder. I thought of Richard's picture on the mantel, and how, this morning, I touched the glass and told him I missed him. I lay very still and made a promise in the cold dirt. If I climbed back from this edge, I would not look away again. I would follow every number, every signature, every too sweet word to its root. And when the time came, I would speak where someone could hear me. 2 more inches, Thomas breathed. On my count. 1, 2. Before there was blood on my tongue and wind at my back, there was warmth. A house is only wood and brick to most, but to us it was a living body, breathing with every footstep, remembering every laugh, carrying the weight of every sorrow. Our home sat on the edge of a quiet town, white paint peeling in lace patterns, ivy climbing one side like a green secret. Behind it, Thomas's workshop leaned into the yard, its roofline sagging with years, its windows dusty with sawdust that glittered like gold in the afternoon light. Inside that shop, my husband built more than tables and chairs. He built a life for us, plank by plank. Mornings began with the scent of coffee and the whistle of the kettle. I would place 2 cups on the oak table, his creation, carved with ridges that caught crumbs but held memory like a shrine. That table had borne the weight of birthday cakes, school projects, and elbows thrown down during teenage arguments. Sometimes, when the house was empty, I would run my fingers over its scars, each one a chapter: the burn from Richard's failed experiment, the notch from Damien's toy car, the faint line where Thomas had measured wood and forgotten to wipe away the pencil mark. Our days followed rhythms so steady I mistook them for eternal. I walked to the elementary school where I taught second graders their letters, their sums, and how to listen for birdsong between lessons. My students would give me drawings, crude rainbows, and stick figures, and I would tack them to the classroom walls until there was no space left for white. Thomas spent his hours with cedar and walnut, coaxing beauty from what looked like scrap. His hands, rough and scarred, could persuade a board into singing under the plane. And then there were Sundays. I see them clearer than anything else. After church, we'd crowd the house with noise. Richard, our eldest, his laugh rising above everyone's, a melody too large for walls. He had dreams big enough to carry all of us: college, engineering, maybe one day his own company. Damien, quieter, sitting at the same table, pushing peas across his plate, shadowing his brother's light. I told myself it was just temperament. Some children bloom loud, some bloom inward. I thought love would be enough to balance them. I thought I had done it right. Family gathered, often sisters with their casseroles, cousins tumbling through the yard, Thomas in the shed fixing whatever the men broke, women in the kitchen trading recipes like secrets. When dusk came, we'd sit on the porch and count the stars. "One day," Thomas would say, brushing sawdust from his jeans, "we'll see the ocean together. Build a little house where the waves do the talking. I would smile, believing promises were the same as certainties. But families are not steady lines. They twist, they snap, they hide things in their corners. The first shadow fell when Richard turned 20. Arguments flared between him and Damien, muffled in hallways, silenced when I appeared. I told myself it was nothing more than brothers finding their shapes against each other. Thomas would say, "Let them be. Boys sort themselves out." I wanted to believe him because the alternative was too heavy. Then came the night Richard didn't come home. I remember pacing the floorboards so hard they creaked under my heels. Midnight. 1, 2. Every hour stretched like wire. Damien claimed he was studying, his eyes flat when I knocked at his door. Thomas searched the streets with neighbors, lanterns swinging, voices calling Richard's name into the dark. Dawn broke with a cruelty I had never known, and with it came the news. Richard, found at the bottom of the gorge, still and cold. They said it was an accident. I believed them because my heart demanded it. The funeral left me hollow. My black dress clung to me like guilt, and tears blurred every face into gray. Damien stood like a statue, neither crying nor raging. He only watched, eyes unreadable, while I buried my firstborn. I told myself grief has many disguises. I told myself not to question. But even then, something in my bones whispered, "Be careful." Afterward, Damien changed. He grew attentive, helpful, tender, in ways that felt almost rehearsed. He carried groceries, fixed shelves, brought me tea when I looked weary. He wrapped himself in goodness so thick it seemed almost saintly. I wanted to accept it. I wanted to believe grief had carved a better man from my son. I wanted to. And for years I did. But grief doesn't vanish. It settles like dust, unseen but always there. And as I sat at that oak table, years later, watching Damien's wife run her manicured fingers across its grooves, I felt the dust stir again. Melissa smiled, so sweetly, calling me Mom with lips that tasted of sugar and smoke. She spoke of planning for the future, her voice lilting like a hymn, while her eyes counted value square footage, bank statements, insurance policies. It was then the house shivered under me. The same walls that had once sung with children's laughter now whispered something colder. The air itself seemed to murmur, "Watch, listen, do not look away this time." It began with paper, not shouting, not slammed doors, not broken glass, just paper laid flat on the oak table, its edges too sharp for a home that had once held only rounded laughter. Damien slid the folder toward us one evening as Melissa poured tea, her bracelets chiming like a warning bell. "It's nothing complicated, Mom," he said, tone as soft as the wool blanket draped over the back of our sofa. "Just a little planning. You and Dad should feel safe about the future." The folder smelled faintly of printer ink and something sour, maybe the cologne of the lawyer who had prepared it. Inside were words I didn't fully understand: power of attorney, sole beneficiary, irrevocable trust. They looked harmless, black lines on white paper, but my skin prickled as if I'd been handed a snake disguised as ribbon. Melissa reached for my hand, warm, rehearsed. "Think of it as protection," she whispered, echoing the same word she had once used in my kitchen. "You wouldn't want to leave things uncertain." Her thumb stroked my knuckles, but her eyes were on the numbers written in the margins of Thomas's notebook nearby. Our savings, our property lines, our house value. She wasn't touching me. She was touching what she wanted. Thomas, tired from the workshop, rubbed his forehead. "It's practical, Ellie," he muttered, not quite meeting my gaze. "We're not young anymore. What if something happens?" His voice was lined with trust that his son would never twist words into chains. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I wanted to. But as Damien leaned back, smiling that practiced smile, I caught a flicker impatience, sharp as a blade's glint. For a second, I saw not my child, but a stranger rehearsing affection for profit. That night, after they left, I stood alone in the kitchen. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. I stared at the sink full of cups still rimmed with Melissa's lipstick. The air was heavy with the scent of chamomile tea, and something colder, invisible, that clung to the curtains like frost. Thomas came behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders. "You're quiet," he said. His touch should have steadied me. Instead, it pressed the unease deeper. "They're too eager," I whispered. Why rush us into this? He sighed. They love us. They just want to help. But even in his eyes, I saw the faintest shadow of doubt, quickly buried. And that was when I understood. The first crack in our family wasn't in the wood of our table or the paint on our house. It was in the trust we gave too freely, the trust they counted on. The next visits were different. They came often, almost too often, and always with suggestions that scraped against the walls of our home like sandpaper. "Mom," Melissa began one Saturday afternoon, her heels clicking across the kitchen tiles as if she already owned them. "This house is too big for the two of you. You should think about selling while the market is high. We could help you find a smaller place, maybe something in town. Easier, safer." Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes moved like an appraiser's counting square footage, cataloging antiques, measuring the worth of every chair Thomas's hands had shaped. Damien leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, the corner of his mouth tight. "She's right," he said. "What if you fall down the stairs, Mom? What if Dad has another dizzy spell? Who's going to help you then?" His tone was sharper than it had ever been with me, a lecture instead of a conversation. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, torn between reason and instinct. "It makes sense," he murmured. "Less upkeep, less worry." I wanted to shout that this wasn't about upkeep, this was about control, but my throat closed around the words, choking me with silence. That evening, after they left with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, I walked through each room of the house as if I were saying goodbye. The kitchen still smelled of cinnamon from the morning bread. The workshop hummed faintly with the ghost of Thomas's saw, curls of oak littering the floor like petals. Every corner breathed memory birthdays, anniversaries, the night Richard first showed us his acceptance letter, the afternoons when Damien sulked but still sat at the table because I asked him to. How could I abandon this history to the cold language of real estate? When I returned to the living room, Thomas was sitting with the papers spread out again. He tapped them with a heavy finger. "Maybe they're right, Ellie. We're not as strong as we once were." I stared at him, and for the first time in 40 years of marriage, I saw doubt where there should have been certainty. "Or maybe," I whispered, "we're being pushed into a corner." He looked at me then, and I caught it a flicker in his eyes, brief as lightning, a recognition he didn't want to name. But before he could answer, the phone rang. It was Damien. His voice was smooth, polite, threaded with insistence. "Mom, Dad, I really think we should sit down with the lawyer again. It's better to have everything in order. Trust me, it's for the best." I hung up with my heart pounding. Trust me. 2 words that once soothed now sliced. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think the unthinkable. My son was no longer protecting me. He was preparing me. It was late when the silence broke. The house had settled into its nightly size, pipes cooling, wood groaning, but I lay awake, staring at the ceiling where shadows clung like cobwebs. Thomas turned restlessly beside me, his breaths uneven. I knew that rhythm. It meant he was holding something inside. Finally he spoke, voice raw, like it had been waiting for years. "Ellie," he whispered, "I need to tell you something about Richard." My chest tightened. For decades, I had trained myself not to say our eldest son's name too often. It was a wound that never fully scarred. "What about Richard?" I asked, though part of me begged him to stop. Thomas sat up, shoulders hunched, hands covering his face. In the dim light, he looked older, heavier. "That night he died," he began. "I told you I didn't know where Damien was. That wasn't true." The air left my lungs. I pushed myself up, gripping the quilt as if it could anchor me. "What do you mean?" He lowered his hands slowly. His eyes met mine, and what I saw in them was worse than anger, worse than grief. It was guilt thick, choking, decades old. "I saw him, Ellie. Damien wasn't in his room like he claimed. I followed him to the gorge." My heartbeat hammered in my ears. What did you see?" Thomas swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "They were arguing, screaming really. Richard had papers in his hand, bank statements. He was accusing Damien of stealing from us. Damien was furious. He shouted that Richard always got everything, that he was sick of being second. Then," he faltered, covering his face again. Damien pushed him. The room spun. My throat closed around a scream that never came. "No," I whispered. "No, you can't mean." "He pushed him, Ellie," Thomas said, choking on the words. I saw Richard stumble, try to catch himself, but there was nothing to grab, and then he was gone. I pressed a hand to my mouth. My son, my quiet boy who had turned attentive after his brother's death, had carried that mask for 25 years. And my husband, my partner, had carried the truth, buried in silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, my voice trembling between rage and despair. "Because he was our only surviving child," Thomas whispered. "Because he begged me, said it was an accident, and Richard was already gone. What would it have changed to destroy the other son we had left?" I turned away, tears burning hot tracks down my cheeks. The quilt beneath my fingers felt like sandpaper. Everything I thought I knew about our family collapsed in that moment. The kindness Damien had shown, the tenderness after Richard's death, it wasn't love. It was camouflage. And now, years later, I finally understood the flicker I'd seen in his eyes when he asked us to sign papers, when Melissa counted our belongings with her smile. It wasn't just greed. It was unfinished business. I whispered into the dark, more to myself than to Thomas. If he killed his brother for money, what would stop him from killing us? The silence that followed was colder than any winter night. The next morning, Damien arrived early, Melissa at his side with that tote bag she always carried, lemon yellow like sunlight forced into fabric. They hadn't called first. They never asked anymore. They came with certainty, as if the door already belonged to them. "Mom, Dad," Damien said, voice too cheerful. "We thought we'd bring breakfast." He set a box of pastries on the table, powdered sugar dusting the wood like ash. Melissa poured coffee without asking, sliding cups into our hands as though she were the hostess of this house. Then came the folder. Always the folder. She laid it on the oak table between us, tapping the corner with manicured nails. We should finalize the power of attorney. Just precaution, of course. If something happened to either of you, we could take care of the bills, the house, everything. Smooth, simple. Thomas stiffened beside me. I felt his leg press against mine under the table, a silent plea for calm, but I couldn't be calm. Not anymore. Not after what he had confessed the night before. "We're capable of managing our own affairs," I said, keeping my voice steady. Damien's smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened. "Mom, don't be stubborn. You and Dad are getting older. It only takes one fall, one hospital stay, and everything becomes chaos. Do you want that burden on us?" Melissa leaned forward, her perfume heavy, almost suffocating. "We only want to help," she cooed. "But it would be so much easier if you'd sign. It's just paperwork." Just paperwork. Words that could erase a lifetime of work, of sacrifice, of love. Thomas cleared his throat. "Maybe we need more time to consider." Damien's hand tightened around his coffee cup. His jaw flexed. "Dad, there's nothing to consider. It's logical, responsible. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The room chilled. Outside, a sparrow fluttered at the window, wings frantic against the glass, as though it knew something we didn't. Melissa broke the silence with a gentle laugh that sounded like glass cracking. "Why don't we schedule an appointment with Albert? He's family, practically. He'll explain everything again. You'll see." I wanted to scream that I already saw through them, saw the greed hiding behind their smiles. But Thomas's confession pressed heavy on my chest. If I pushed too hard now, if I accused, they might move faster, more violently. So I nodded, lips tight, while my heart pounded like a hammer. "We'll think about it," I said. Damien leaned back, victorious. "Good. Don't wait too long." His smile stretched, but his eyes were Richard's gorge all over again. Cold, calculating, waiting for the push. When they left, the house felt smaller, suffocated by the echo of their voices. I gathered the crumbs of the pastries into my hand, crushed them until sugar and dough smeared my palm. "It's starting again," I whispered. Thomas turned toward me, face ashen. "No," he said, but it sounded like a prayer he no longer believed. It was a Tuesday evening when the tension finally snapped. The day had been gray, the kind of sky that pressed low on the roof and made every sound echo sharper. I had just finished grading a stack of old spelling tests when the doorbell rang. Thomas looked at me, tired, and I knew without asking it would be them again. Damien didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, Melissa trailing behind with her tote bag, her smile as fixed as porcelain. "Mom, Dad, we really need to settle this," he said, tossing his coat over the back of a chair as though the house belonged to him. Melissa set the folder down on the table with a soft thud. "We've already spoken to Albert," she announced. "He says it's best if we handle the finances directly. No complications later." I stiffened. "Later?" The word caught like a fishbone in my throat. "Later when? We're not dead yet." The air thickened. Damien's jaw clenched, and for the first time, the mask slipped. "Why are you making this so difficult?" he snapped. His voice was low but carried an edge I had never heard aimed at me before. "We're trying to protect you, and you're acting like we're the enemy." Thomas raised his hand, trying to calm the waters. "Son, no one is your enemy, but your mother and I are still in our right minds. We don't need anyone managing our money yet." Damien's laugh was bitter, short. "Right minds? Dad, you forget things all the time. Mom gets confused with bills. How long before something serious happens? You think the bank will wait while you fumble with paperwork?" Melissa slid closer, resting her manicured hand on mine. "We only want to make life easier for you. Please, don't misunderstand." Her touch was soft, but her eyes were hard. She didn't blink. I pulled my hand back, cold spreading through my veins. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "You want control, but Thomas and I built this life. We decide what happens to it." Damien's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. For a moment, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the child who once clung to my skirt, was gone. In his place stood a man whose smile was gone, whose eyes carried the same shadow Thomas had described from 25 years ago at the gorge. "Fine," he said flatly. "If you want to make things harder for yourselves, don't say we didn't warn you." He turned, grabbing his coat with a violent tug. Melissa lingered a second longer. She leaned down, close enough that her perfume choked me. "We'll give you time," she whispered. "But time runs out faster than you think." When the door closed behind them, silence pressed heavy against the walls. I looked at Thomas, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. "They're done pretending," I whispered. Thomas nodded slowly, eyes dark with something I couldn't name. "Yes," he said, voice low. "And God help us, Ellie. I think I know what comes next." The house was quiet when Thomas disappeared into his workshop that night. I thought he was sanding wood or oiling tools to calm himself, but when I went to bring him tea, I found him hunched over his desk, papers scattered like fallen leaves. His spectacles slid down his nose, his hands shaking as he sifted through folders I hadn't seen in years. "What are you doing?" I asked softly, though fear had already curled itself around my ribs. He didn't look up. "Checking," he muttered. "I should have done this long ago." The desk lamp cast a narrow cone of light, catching the edge of a worn manila envelope. Bank statements, letters from the credit union, even copies of our property deeds, documents I thought were tucked safely in the locked cabinet. He had been digging, pulling them out from where we'd hidden them after Richard died. "Ellie," he whispered, tapping a page with his rough finger. "Look here." The numbers didn't make sense. Withdrawals in small amounts at first, neat enough to look like oversight, but then larger sums, spaced just far enough apart to keep from raising alarms. My throat tightened as I scanned the dates. Some reached back years, all under Thomas's signature, or rather, something that looked like it. "That isn't your handwriting," I said, my voice sharp. He shook his head slowly. "It's forged. Sloppy, but passable to a teller who doesn't look too closely." I pressed a hand to my mouth. "Damien," I whispered. Thomas's eyes met mine, haunted. Who else would know where we keep these documents? Who else would need the money? The room tilted. All those years of Damien insisting he was doing well, that his carpentry business was thriving, was it all a lie? My stomach knotted. If he was stealing from us even while pretending to care, then what wouldn't he do? Thomas reached for another folder, this one creased, almost hidden beneath the rest. He pulled out a thin stack of invoices, stamped overdue. "Suppliers," he muttered. "He owes them, more than I imagined." The numbers glared up at me, tens of thousands, each one a nail in the coffin of my illusions. I sank into the chair across from him. "He's drowning," I said hollowly. "And he means to drag us down with him." Thomas rubbed his temples. "This isn't just about inheritance anymore. He needs money now, desperately." He hesitated, then added, "And desperate men don't wait for death. They create it." The words chilled the air between us. I remembered Melissa's whisper at the door. "Time runs out faster than you think." I stood abruptly, pacing the workshop floor where curls of cedar lay like shavings of memory. We have to go to the police. Thomas's face twisted. With what? Bank statements that could be explained away? Forgeries we can't yet prove? They'll say we're paranoid. Old. He was right, and the truth was heavier than the oak beams above us. I stopped, gripping the edge of his workbench. Then we watch. We gather proof. We don't give them the chance to bury us before anyone knows what's happening. For a moment, the only sound was the tick of the clock and the faint creak of the house settling. Then Thomas nodded, his jaw tight. "I'll start recording," he said. "Every conversation, every visit, if they slip, we'll have it." I met his eyes, the same eyes that had watched Richard fall 25 years ago, and saw the resolve harden there. For the first time, I realized we weren't just parents anymore. We were prey, and predators were circling. The shift came quietly, like a draft slipping through a crack in the window. Damien and Melissa stopped arguing about papers. Instead, they arrived at the house with laughter on their lips and plans dressed as gifts. "Mom," Damien said one evening, his voice rich with false warmth, "we've been thinking. It's been years since you and Dad had a real vacation. Why don't we take a trip together? Somewhere beautiful. Somewhere peaceful." Melissa clasped her hands as if she were presenting a prize. "We found this trail up in the mountains," she said, eyes shining too brightly. "Easy, safe. Families go there all the time. The view from the top is supposed to be breathtaking." The words easy and safe clanged in my head like broken bells. Thomas shifted uneasily in his chair. "We're not hikers," he said. "Your mother's knee." Melissa cut him off with a smile sharp enough to slice. "That's why we'll handle everything. Equipment, supplies, even a first aid kit. You'll just enjoy the scenery. Think of it as a celebration. 40 years of marriage deserves something special, doesn't it?" My heart stuttered. A celebration. The phrasing was too neat, too rehearsed. Damien leaned forward, elbows on the oak table. "Trust us. This will be a memory you'll treasure forever." The word forever sat heavy in the room, like a stone dropped into deep water. That night after they left, Thomas pulled me into the bedroom, shutting the door with trembling hands. "You hear it too, don't you?" he whispered. "Yes." My voice cracked. "They're planning something." He opened the drawer of his nightstand and pulled out the small recorder he'd bought years ago to capture bird songs on our walks. He placed it in my palm. "Next time they come, it goes on. Every word, every slip. If we don't make it back, someone will know the truth." I closed my hand around the device. It felt heavier than any weapon. When I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I thought of Richard, how he must have stood at the gorge with his brother, hearing words that sounded like arguments but were really death sentences. I imagined the look in his eyes before he fell the disbelief that family could turn into executioner. Now, decades later, it was our turn to stand at the edge. And I knew, with a clarity sharper than any blade, this trip would not be a gift. It would be an invitation to die. They came the following Friday, smiling as if joy itself had stitched their faces. Melissa carried a shopping bag brimming with supplies: bottled water, trail mix, sunscreen, neatly folded blankets. She spread the contents across our kitchen table, like a magician laying out props. "See?" she said brightly. "We've thought of everything. You won't have to lift a finger." I stared at the items, each one innocent by itself, but together they looked like evidence in waiting. The water bottles gleamed like glass coffins. The rope coiled in Damien's hands might as well have been a noose. Damien dropped a new hiking backpack on the floor with a heavy thud. "Got it all: harnesses, lanterns, even a flare gun," he said with forced enthusiasm. "Safety first." The word safety hissed in my ears. Thomas forced a chuckle. "All this for an easy trail?" Damien's smile was too quick, too wide. "You can never be too careful." Melissa leaned over and kissed my cheek, her perfume sweet as rot. "You'll love it, Mom. The fresh air will do you good. Think of the pictures we'll take. Memories for a lifetime." I shivered. She said it like a promise she had no intention of keeping. That night, after they left, Thomas and I sat in the dim light of the living room, the recorder between us on the coffee table. The silence pressed heavy until he finally spoke. "We can't refuse to go," he said. "If we cancel, they'll find another way. At least on the trail, we'll know what's coming." I wanted to argue, to scream, to beg him not to risk it. But he was right. We were trapped either way. He reached into his desk and pulled out a sealed envelope, sliding it toward me. "It's for Harriet," he said, naming my sister. "If we don't come back, she'll know the truth." I touched the envelope with trembling fingers. My throat ached with unshed tears. "Thomas, what if we don't make it?" He took my hands, rough palms covering mine. "Then we'll die together. But if there's a chance, if even one chance, we'll bring them down." I looked at him, the man I had built a life with for 40 years, and for the first time I saw him, not just as my husband, but as my ally in a war we never chose. The wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not for safety, not even for survival, but for justice. Because I knew tomorrow's adventure was no vacation. It was an execution dressed as a family outing. Saturday dawned with a cruel kind of beauty. The sky was washed in pale gold, the air crisp enough to sting my lungs. Damien whistled when he arrived, cheerful as a man on holiday. "Morning, lovebirds," he called, too loud, too rehearsed. Melissa trailed behind him, radiant in a white jacket, as if this were a wedding procession instead of a death march. They loaded their bags into the car, Damien humming while checking straps and buckles. "Everything's ready. You'll be safe with us," he said, and the words curled in my ears like smoke. Thomas squeezed my hand once, his thumb brushing the recorder hidden deep in his coat pocket. The drive took 2 hours. Melissa played cheerful music, singing along while tapping her fingers on the dashboard. She laughed at nothing, each laugh like a needle in my skin. Damien drove carefully, obeying every sign, every light, the perfect son in the eyes of the law. He wanted no accidents except the one he had scripted. When we reached the trailhead, the world opened into tall pines and the distant roar of water. Birds darted between branches, unaware that humans had come to turn beauty into betrayal. Melissa clapped her hands. "Isn't it perfect? We'll picnic at the lookout." Lookout. The word sank into my stomach like a stone. We began walking. At first the trail was gentle, a winding path of moss and wildflowers. Melissa took pictures constantly, Thomas and me holding hands, the valley stretching behind us. "Smile," she chirped, the camera flash winking like a signal. I forced my lips into something resembling joy, though every muscle in my body screamed. Damien walked behind us, too close, his boots crunching in rhythm with my heartbeat. "How are you holding up, Mom? Need to stop?" His concern was painted on, the brushstrokes too even, too practiced. After an hour, the path grew steeper. My legs ached, Thomas's breathing turned ragged. Melissa glanced back, her smile sharp. "Almost there. Just a bit more." But I remembered the map. We weren't anywhere near the real lookout yet. Wherever she was leading us, it wasn't on the tourist trail. The air thinned as we climbed, each step heavier, each glance backward a reminder of the void waiting below. Finally, Melissa stopped, pointing at a jagged rock formation rising to our right. "There," she said brightly, "the view is incredible. We'll take special photos up there." My blood turned to ice. The cliff stood like a blade against the sky, its edge crumbling into a gorge so deep, the river below looked like a silver thread. No rails, no safety, just gravity waiting. Thomas's hand brushed mine, a whisper of warning. His eyes met mine, steady despite the fear. "Not yet," they said. "Play along." We followed, step by trembling step, toward the place where our children had decided we would die. The climb to the cliff felt like an eternity pressed into minutes. The rocks shifted under my boots, loose and treacherous, and each slip echoed the story they wanted told. 2 old people, too fragile for the mountain, 1 misstep, a tragedy. My lungs burned, my knees screamed, but fear carried me higher than strength ever could. Melissa reached the top first, camera swinging from her neck, her laughter ringing false in the thin air. "Look at this view," she exclaimed, spreading her arms as if the valley belonged to her. Behind me, Thomas grunted as Damien pushed gently at his elbow, the nudge too forceful to be concern. When we finally stood together at the summit, the world unfurled below us pines like green waves, the river a ribbon of silver light. In another life, it would have been beautiful. In this one, it was an execution ground. "Stand here," Melissa instructed, pointing to a patch of dirt barely a step from the precipice. "Closer together so I can get the valley behind you." Thomas's hand tightened around mine. His skin was damp, trembling, but his eyes were steady. He had the recorder tucked beneath his coat, its red light blinking against his chest like a heartbeat. We obeyed, moving back until my heels kissed the void. The wind rose, tugging at my coat, whispering promises of the fall. "Perfect," Melissa said, raising the camera. "Now, smile." The shutter clicked once, twice, each flash like lightning announcing a storm. Damien moved behind us, too close, his shadow spilling over ours. "One more," he said smoothly. "Step back just a little. The picture will be spectacular." Spectacular. My stomach lurched, that word again. I forced a smile, my lips trembling, while Thomas's grip on my waist grew fierce. The ground at my back was nothing but air, the abyss calling. Then Melissa lowered the camera. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time she didn't bother with sweetness. Her voice was stripped bare of charm. "Smile wide," she said coldly. "This is going to be your last photo." Damien lunged. Thomas reacted, faster than fear itself. He caught his son's wrist, yanking him forward. For a heartbeat, all four of us tangled Thomas. Me, Damien, Melissa locked in a hideous dance at the lip of death. Gravel shifted, the earth crumbled. Melissa screamed, and then the world tipped. We fell together. Air tore at my face, my ears filled with the roar of the gorge, my heart clanged against my ribs like a bell. Time slowed, stretching into a cruel eternity. I thought of Richard. I thought of the night Thomas confessed. I thought of my home, my table, the dent in the wood where life had once been safe. The impact was thunder. Bones cracked, breath fled, blood filled my mouth. Pain screamed through me, unbearable, endless. But then Thomas's voice, ragged but alive. "Ellie, don't move, play dead." Through the haze of agony, I obeyed. I stilled every breath, every twitch, my eyes fixed on the gray sky above. And when I heard Melissa groan, Damien curse, I knew they hadn't finished us. Not yet. I forced myself into stillness, every muscle aching to scream. Blood pooled in my mouth, metallic and thick, but I swallowed it down, tasting silence instead. Beside me, Thomas lay twisted, his eyes half closed, his breath so shallow it barely stirred the dirt. The recorder hidden in his coat blinked faintly, alive, waiting. A groan broke the air. Melissa. Her voice was shrill with pain. "Damien, my leg, I think it's broken." Damien cursed under his breath, dragging himself across the rocks. The scrape of his boots grew closer, then stopped. "They're dead," he said flatly. Both of them, eyes open, not breathing. The words chilled me. He was declaring my death like a doctor giving a diagnosis, certain, confident. Melissa gave a bitter laugh that turned into a sob. "Perfect, just like we planned, except for us falling too." "Stop whining," Damien snapped. "We'll crawl out, call for help. We'll say it was an accident. Dad slipped, tried to grab Mom, and we went over with them." Simple. Tragic. No one will question it. Melissa shifted, wincing. "We've practiced the story 100 times, she murmured. "Poor us. We lost our dear parents in a horrible accident." Damien's tone hardened, rehearsing the lines even as his body bled. "We were taking photos. A rock came loose. They fell. We tried to help, but we slipped too. That's it. That's all anyone will hear." I wanted to scream that I was hearing every word, that the recorder was capturing their lies, branding them in sound forever. Instead, I let my lips part just enough to breathe, shallow and silent. Melissa's voice turned venomous. "At least now we don't have to pretend anymore. All those dinners, all those fake hugs. God, I'm glad it's over." Damien grunted. "Not yet. We need to crawl to a spot with signal. Then we play the grieving survivors. They'll believe us, why wouldn't they? Who suspects their own children?" Thomas's finger twitched against mine, the tiniest signal. "Hold on." We stayed frozen, listening, while the monsters we had raised mapped out their alibi. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it would give me away, but the gorge swallowed every beat, carrying it off with the river's roar. At last, Damien's voice, hoarse with pain. "Remember, don't mention the money. Not a word about the debts. If anyone suspects, it all falls apart." Melissa's reply was faint but clear, dripping with malice. "Then keep your mouth shut. And when it's over, the house, the land, the savings, it's all ours." The recorder blinked again, tireless, preserving every syllable. I closed my eyes and let the truth sink into me. My son, my blood, my boy who once held my hand crossing streets now plotted my funeral while my body still pulsed with life. But we weren't finished. Not yet. The gorge was quiet again after their voices faded, save for the drip of water seeping from the rocks and the faint rustle of pine branches far above. My body screamed, but stillness was survival. I counted breaths, shallow and careful, each one a bargain with God. Thomas stirred beside me, his lips barely moving. "Ellie." I shifted my head a fraction, enough to catch his whisper. His face was pale, streaked with dirt and blood, his eyes glazed with pain. But beneath the exhaustion there was something else, a weight that had been waiting for years. "I can't go without telling you," he rasped. "Not anymore." I wanted to hush him, to tell him to save his strength, but the urgency in his eyes froze me. He was unraveling a knot that had strangled him for decades, and if he died now, it would remain knotted forever. "The night Richard died," he whispered, "I wasn't honest with you. I told you the police were right that it was an accident. But Ellie, I saw." His voice cracked, carrying a grief that sounded older than time. "I followed Damien that night. I saw them fighting at the gorge. I saw our youngest push his brother." The words landed heavier than the stones beneath my back. I had suspected, felt it in the marrow of my bones, but hearing Thomas admit it split me open. "Why?" My own voice was no louder than a breath. "Why didn't you tell me?" Tears cut clean lines through the grime on his face. "Because Richard was already gone. And Damien, he begged me. Said it was an accident. That he didn't mean it. He was our last son. Ellie. I thought if I buried the truth we could still have a family. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me." The words stabbed deeper than the broken bone in my arm. I turned my face toward the sky, its pale light mocking me. "You let me believe a lie for 25 years. Thomas reached weakly for my hand. "I know. I was a coward. Every day since, I've carried it like lead. I told myself he would change, that guilt would make him better. But look where we are now." His grip trembled. "I'm so sorry." The gorge seemed to close in around us. I saw Richard's face in the shadows, young and bright, his laugh echoing in the memory of Sunday dinners. Then I saw Damien's, twisted with greed, the same hands that once clung to me now pushing me toward death. I pressed my forehead to Thomas's shoulder. My tears mingled with his blood. "We'll make it out," I whispered, not sure if I believed it. "And this time, we won't stay silent. Not about Richard, not about any of it." Above us, a crow cawed, its cry slicing the air like an omen. Somewhere, Damien and Melissa crawled toward help, rehearsing their story, polishing their lies. But down here in the dirt, in the place where truth had been buried once before, we carried something stronger than their story. We carried proof. And this time, the truth would not stay buried. Hours bled together in the gorge, each one longer than the last. The pain became its own kind of timekeeper, throbbing in my shoulder, stabbing in my ribs, humming like fire through my leg. Somewhere in that haze, I heard Thomas groan, then fall silent, his breath shallow but steady. Then came the distant sound, voices. First faint, then closer. Boots against rock, radios crackling, and above all the whirring chop of helicopter blades, slicing the mountain air. Damien's voice rose, clear, rehearsed, trembling just enough to convince. "Down here, please hurry. My parents, they fell. We tried to save them." His sobs echoed down like rain, every note polished for the role of grieving son. Melissa joined in, her cries sharp, guttural, breaking at all the right places. "It happened so fast," she wailed. "We couldn't stop them. They're gone." The gorge filled with their performance, every syllable designed to drown the truth. I felt Thomas squeeze my hand weakly. His lips moved against my ear. "The recorder, it has everything. But if they see we're alive now, they'll find a way to destroy it. We have to wait. Wait." The word seared through me. My body screamed to be lifted out, to be healed, to live. But my mind knew if we revealed ourselves too soon, Damien's lies would be the first version the world heard. And lies are hard to undo once they've hardened into sympathy. The rescuers descended, ropes clanging against stone. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing shallow, my pulse slowed by sheer force of will. A hand brushed my neck, searching for life. "This one's faint," a medic called out. "Critical but alive. The woman, I'm not sure. Get the medical team down here." Melissa's sobs carried from above. "No, not Mom, please God, no." Theatrical, convincing, vile. A paramedic leaned close, pressing an oxygen mask to my face. "Stay with us," he whispered, not knowing I already was. I let my body remain limp, let them believe I hovered at the edge of death. Thomas's voice, low and broken, reached me as they secured him to a stretcher. "If we survive this, Ellie, we end it." No more silence. Richard deserves the truth. I wanted to answer, but the straps tightened around me, and all I could do was squeeze his hand once, weak but sure. Yes, we would rise. As they lifted us toward the helicopter, Melissa's voice drifted down like poisoned honey. "They were the best parents. We'll never forget them." I let the words pass over me like smoke. Soon the mask would slip, and when it did, the world would see their true faces, because we were not gone. Not yet. And the moment we chose to rise would be the moment their lies died forever. The hospital lights were blinding when they wheeled me in, but I kept my eyelids heavy, my breathing shallow, clinging to the act that had bought us time. Machines beeped steadily around me, tubes pressed into my skin, voices called orders I could barely follow. Through it all, I lay still, half patient, half spy. In the waiting room, Damien and Melissa played their parts to perfection. I heard them before I saw them, their voices threading through the thin walls. Melissa's sobs were sharp and rhythmic, like waves breaking on cue. "I can't believe they're gone," she told anyone who would listen. "We tried everything. God knows we tried." Damien's tone was lower, roughened with just the right grief. "My parents, they slipped. I couldn't save them. I'll never forgive myself." His words trembled, each syllable chosen as carefully as nails in a coffin. But lies always have cracks. Later, when the nurses changed shifts, one young woman her badge red lingered by my bed, checking monitors. She leaned close, whispering as if she weren't even sure I could hear. "Your son was here earlier," she murmured. "He leaned down to your ear. He thought you were unconscious." Her eyes darted toward the door. "He told you. Some truths are better buried. Just like Richard." My pulse spiked, and the monitor betrayed me with a faster rhythm. The nurse's eyes widened. "You heard me, didn't you?" she whispered, her hand tightening on mine. I fought to move, to give her something. My finger twitched once, then again, then a third time. She gasped softly. "Oh my God, you're pretending." Her grip steadied, her voice quickened with resolve. "Don't worry, I'll tell the doctor, and the police. But you have to keep the act. If they know you heard them, you'll never be safe." I twitched once more, yes. That evening, Melissa entered the room, her perfume cloying, her heels sharp against the linoleum. She brushed hair from my forehead with false tenderness. "Goodbye, Mom," she whispered, her lips grazing my temple. "We'll take care of everything now. Rest easy." Her words dripped with triumph. Damien followed, leaning so close I could feel the heat of his breath. "I hope you've learned your lesson," he hissed, his voice laced with venom. "You should never have asked questions about our finances." Richard didn't listen either. My blood turned cold, but my body stayed still. His words, like knives, cut deeper than my wounds, but every syllable was a gift. Evidence. When they left, Nurse Innes slipped back in, her face pale but resolute. "I heard," she said firmly. "And so did another nurse outside. You're not alone anymore. They've damned themselves." For the first time since the fall, I let my eyes open, just a sliver. Relief washed through me like light-breaking stone. The masquerade was cracking, their stage was collapsing, and soon the world would see them for what they truly were. By dawn the next morning, the truth was no longer ours alone to bear. Nurse Innes had spoken to the head physician, who in turn contacted the police. 2 detectives arrived quietly, their shoes squeaking on the polished hospital floor. They carried not just suspicion but protection, placing officers at the door of my room. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint pulse of safety. Detective Johnson, a man with silver at his temples and eyes that missed nothing, leaned over my bed. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly, "we know you've been through hell, but we need to hear it from you. What really happened on that mountain?" My throat was raw, my voice a rasp, but I forced the words out. My son and his wife pushed us. They planned it for months. They thought we were dead. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept speaking. They killed my Richard 25 years ago, and they tried to kill us the same way. The detective nodded gravely. We have your nurse's testimony. We'll need the recorder your husband carried. Thomas, pale but conscious in the next room, surrendered the small device with shaking hands. The red light still blinked. Hours of venomous whispers, Melissa's gloating, Damien's threats all preserved in merciless clarity. While the detectives listened, Damien and Melissa sat in the waiting room, their arms draped in false grief, receiving condolences from strangers who pitied them. They had no idea that their carefully built lie was crumbling one word at a time. By midday, the arrest warrants were signed. Officers approached them with quiet efficiency. Damien Carter, Melissa Carter, you are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. The silence that followed was sharp as shattered glass. Then Melissa shrieked, her sobs turning wild. This isn't true. We're the victims. They fell. It was an accident. Damien's face drained of color. No, he muttered, shaking his head. No, that's impossible. They were dead. I saw them. His voice broke into a howl. They were dead. The officers tightened their grip on his arms. Every word he spilled another nail in his coffin. Melissa, desperate, turned on him in front of everyone. You're the one who planned it. You said the cliff was perfect. Don't drag me down with you. The lie they had rehearsed fractured into panic, each of them clawing at the other to survive. The detectives watched, recording every syllable. Later in court, I faced them one final time. Damien sat in chains, his eyes no longer my son's but those of a stranger hollowed by greed. Melissa wept into her hands, mascara streaking her cheeks, her sweetness long dissolved. When I finished my testimony, the jury's faces were pale, their eyes wide with horror. 3 days later, the verdict rang out, guilty. Both sentenced to life without parole. It was not victory. There is no victory in burying 2 children, one by death, the other by his own sins. But it was justice, and it was truth. Months later, Thomas and I stood in our quiet house once more. The walls still whispered with memories Richard's laughter, Damien's sulking silence, the smell of bread cooling on the counter. But there was something new in the air, too. A fragile peace. We had taken in Damien's children, innocent, bewildered, their eyes searching for answers we could not fully give. At night, when I tucked them into bed, I told them stories of their Uncle Richard, of kindness and honesty, of dreams worth holding. Sometimes, when the house was still, I walked to the oak table Thomas carved 40 years ago. I ran my fingers over its scars, each one a chapter we had survived. And I whispered a promise to Richard, to myself, to the children now sleeping under my roof. The truth will live here, always.